Well, good afternoon and welcome to our members. And we have several guests on here, so it's good to see you all. This is our presentation for the League of Women Voters of Chaffee County of Truth in Media. I'm Karen Dills, the membership chair, and I look forward to meeting a lot of our new members live and in person sometime later this year. We are now at 119 members. I'd like to give first a big thank you to Cheryl Brown-Kovacic for getting this together on fairly short notice, and to our panelists whom she will introduce in a little bit. Please make sure your video is off and that you are muted. You'll be able to ask questions in our chat room in a civil manner, please. This presentation will be recorded and will be posted on our website in a few days. So you can have your friends watch it. And so now I'm going to turn this over to our main presenter, Cheryl Brown-Kovacic.
Okay, thank you very much, and certainly appreciate the invitation to present this program for the League. I wanted to do some sort of interactive things here, and so we're going to try and do that on chat. It's going to be kind of an experiment. But we will start with, I would like to tell you a little bit about the Truth as a Voice Foundation, and then give you a little bit of introduction to media literacy, so you all have a sense of what that's about. And then we'll move into the main part of the session, the panel discussion. And again, thank you to our three panelists for being willing to participate. So the Truth Has a Voice Foundation was formed in mid-2020. It is under the umbrella of the Chaffee County Community Foundation, and it sort of arose out of kind of the period of unrest that we're going through at this point with the pandemic and climate change events in the background. We've seen a major polarization in the country. We have an extreme gap in the earnings between the rich and the poor, the greatest that we've ever had. We have had this in the last year or two, quite a lot of exposure of racial inequality, and then great distrust in leadership, in government, in science, in policing, in the media. With a lot of confusion between fact and opinion. We've got different versions of the truth. And we've also had a real rise in the conflict between individual rights and community well-being. And so our goal was to really examine the role of news media and social media in the midst of all of this. And to do so on a local level. Our focus is local, and to do some educating in this area, and also to provide some opportunities to have dialogue between left-leaning and right-leaning people in our county. So our projects are, we have some journalism internships for college and high school students. We've held a community forum last year for the county commissioners. And then right now we're in the midst of a documentary film series, and we're using the documentaries as a way to initiate conversation and do, as well as do some educating. So our first event was just recently in August. We held it up in BV. We called it a community discussion. Everyone registered as either right-leaning or left-leaning or an observer, and watched the film, a film that was on the ideas of Thomas Sowell, who was a conservative economist. We focused on trying to understand each other rather than on changing minds. And we did a little bit of work on questioning, trying to help people with the kinds of questions that would help them understand and sort of clarify. Our next event will be October 21st at the STEAM plant. And we are going to show the documentary, The Social Dilemma. And so that will be kind of an educating focus that's really a little more on social media. And then in the spring, we hope to hold a couple more sessions, one on education and maybe another community discussion. We've also been doing some work in the area of media literacy. There have been 2 bills recently passed in our state legislature. These were sponsored by Representative Lisa Cutter and Barb McLachlan. The first one was House Bill 191110, and it established an advisory committee, and this was chaired by staff from West Ed. And they focused on recommendations to the legislature and also to develop some resources in media literacy for teachers. And then just this past session was House Bill 211103. And that established Colorado media literacy standards, and also that those media literacy standards would be taught in conjunction with civics, reading, and writing standards. And so we've been having some discussion with the school districts, sort of exploring how we might help support the school district in introducing this into the education in our districts. And and I'm also working with some individual teachers, kind of helping them with some resources with that. So I also wanted to introduce Joanne Allen, who is with us today, who is the Vice President of the Truth Has a Voice Foundation and also a League of Women Voters member. And I also wanted to mention that our session in BV last month was co-sponsored by B. Harnish and Jim Height. And Jim Height is also a League member and has been trained as a facilitator by Braver Angels, which is a national organization that tries to promote dialogue between left-leaning and right-leaning citizens. And Jim is getting ready to do a longer, more intense session, dialogue between these 2 groups. And so if you're interested in that, you should contact Jim. So just
Supposed to do that.
Pardon me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you give the contact information for Jim?
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We'll put his email in the chat. It's a good idea. So in talking about media literacy, I think the first thing that we all have to recognize is that each of us have cognitive biases, whether we think we do or not, we all do. And we have our own interpretations and our own willingness to believe based on our experiences, our belief system, and our desire to support our own perspectives. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we look at some of the handouts. But I'd like to start with a little exercise that we had available for people to look at ahead of time. And so the first thing I think Karen's going to bring up on the screen is an Are You Savvy? Ah, great, there it is. So for those of you that were able to access this ahead of time, there's a short paragraph on statehood for Washington, D.C., and then a list of questions. And I hope some of you were able to look at those questions ahead of time. For those of you that were not, I'm going to pose a question to the people that did do this ahead of time. And while they're answering that on chat, maybe some of you could read through that paragraph and the questions so you have an idea of what's going on. So I've never done this before. We're going to see how this would work. But what I would like you to do is post on the chat how answering these questions may have helped you think about this piece, sort of think about what its influence is intended to be, how it influenced you, as well as if any of these questions were particularly helpful for you to ask yourself, you could comment on that as well. So I'm going to give us just a couple of minutes here, and hopefully people can make a few comments on chat.
You muted? Jen?
Okay, I think that a number of people have made some comments on this, and I appreciate that. It's obviously came across as very much an opinion piece to most people without a lot of substance in it, and some facts, but maybe not some very correct facts. And somebody mentioned the idea of they wouldn't share this. And I think a lot of this self-questioning really comes down to that. What should people share? What should they forward to their friends? And what shouldn't they? And I think if we can get people to think about that, that's one of the things that we want to do with media literacy. The other thing I was hoping people might comment on just a minute here on chat is this idea of fact checking, taking the time to do that, you know, when it's worthwhile to do that, or how often people bother to do that. It seems like we're living in an age where there's a need to do that, and yet I know it takes quite a bit of effort to do that. So I'm just wondering how often people do fact check, and what kinds of things you generally consider before you do share. So we'll take a minute or two for that. Okay, a couple people responded that they do fact check lots of things. And so, that's very much appreciated. We're going to go on to the next handout now. So Karen, if you could pick that up.
Okay.
Okay, this is the one we want. This is from Newslet Tips. And I might also mention that this Are You Savvy comes off of the League of Women Voters in Larimer County has a great toolkit on media literacy on their site. And there's also information on both the state and the National League site that has to do with this. One of the things that we're seeing is that since we all have sort of this natural effort to make sense of the world around us, we generally do that by fitting information into patterns. And the more we can see patterns and relationships, the easier it is for us to store that in our brain and have that retrieved from our brain. But that does make it very easy for conspiracy theories to pop up. And also when we Google or do any kind of a search on something, the algorithms are generally set so that our past is taken into consideration as we get geared to a certain website or certain information. So this whole thing of kind of confirmational bias, where we seek information to support our thinking and discredit what contradicts that, is something that's really causing us some difficulty at this point in time, and has really been highlighted by both social media and all the news media that we are inundated with at this point, and they get shared. I think we also have to recognize that there's a fear element here, fear of change, fear of financial loss or status loss or influence, losing all of that. And so that's another consideration that we need. In terms of preventing all of this, this handout addresses the importance of awareness and also the importance of sort of good news literacy practices that to support steady thinking and critical thinking, to avoid extreme or weird ideas. And if you come across those, that's certainly the time to do some fact checking and also check into what the source is behind this. What this handout doesn't address is that once you have all of this in your brain, how hard it is to break that down. You have to have something that's called fairly extreme cognitive dissonance, where you experience conflict between what is something maybe new that's presented to you and what you already believe. And it's a very long process to break that down. So that makes our whole situation with the polarization that we have particularly difficult. Okay, and then we'll go on to the loaded language exercise.
Okay, just a second.
Okay, there we are. Okay, I think this one came off the National League website, but it's just bringing attention to this idea that as we use a word or a phrase, that there's always a more negative, a more extreme, a more positive one that can be used. And that is sometimes used to place emphasis, sometimes to sway thinking, and also be able to say, oh, I'm still presenting the facts, even though the word choices that I've made sort of put an angle on that. This happens, I think, sometimes purposefully. Sometimes it may be more unconscious. Sometimes it may be an effort on the part of a journalist or somebody with a podcast or any of those ways that we have of communicating nowadays, to reveal more to the reader, to give the reader a sense of the emotion and the feeling that's taking place maybe in a speech or something like that. So I thought it might be fun to just experiment with that a little bit and see if people might like to. There's some examples here that you can see. Like one of them was agony versus discomfort. Obviously, when you use the word agony instead of the word discomfort, it's a much more extreme, relaying a much more extreme situation, much more painful, much more impactful. And so I was hoping that people might pick one of the 5 words that I have here and just provide, you know, just for fun, try and do some more loaded words on your part. I think another example of the loaded word thing here is President Trump had a favorite word, tremendous, that he used over and over and over again in situations like we are making tremendous progress in our foreign relations. And he hardly ever used anything that was more sedate than that, but that was one of his favorite words that was sort of a loaded word. So if you would like to do that on chat and just give the word that you're starting with, pick one of those 5 words and give one of the words that you're starting with, and try and come up with some more loaded language that is basically a synonym to that word. I hope you're all following these on your chat. Some people are coming up with some ones that are sort of fun to look at. You know, I know Meryl just posted an event could be a happening. It could also be a catastrophe or an incident, and grueling and difficult, better, superior, good, awesome, successful. So I think you have the idea of this. You know, I'm not sure that chat is the best way to do this, but it's what we're left with today. So thanks for participating in that. And Karen, would you bring up the tips for truth?
Yep, somewhere.
Okay, this is something that Truth Has a Voice has put together, and it's just a 1-page sheet. It's a nice little summary. Just some questions to think about on the fact or opinion and what the sources are, some questions you can ask yourself. It also lists some of the top fact check websites that you can go to. Did some research on reliable news sources, and it was pretty surprising to me that there were not a lot of those that showed up. The main ones seem to be Rutgers and the Associated Press. And then there's also some questions that have to do with sort of identifying your own personal bias. So, and then also we have a little sheet with some video and an article that you might be interested in. And those you can access through Canopy, through either the Salida Library or the BV Library. You will probably have to enter the names of these, and you will probably have to give your library number to do that. So that gives you just a little taste of what we're talking about with media literacy. So at this time, I would like us to go to our panel members. And we have 3 panel members with us today. Dan Ridenour, probably better known as Dan R.
Hello.
Who's the news director for Heart of the Rocky Radio. And then Jan Wondra, who is the managing editor for the Ark Valley Voice.
Hi.
And Merle Baranczyk, who is the publisher and editor for the Mountain Mail. And Merle will have you unmute yourself too, please, so that you can answer these questions. And we had some questions that were submitted by various members, but I'm going to start us with this first one. Looking back, how did we get to the point where there is such a great distrust of news media? Dan, do you want to start us out?
I'd be glad to. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I hope you can hear me okay. Doing fine?
Yes.
Where did we get to this point with trust in the media? Where we got as far as broadcast media, I can't answer for newspapers, of course, but in broadcast, I mean, I can go back to Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, where they were not a profit center. The network did not make money on those newscasts. It was the Beverly Hillbillies. That's who paid for those newscasts. And then, of course, you get board of directors, you get shareholders involved, and then it becomes a profit center. We have to get ratings. We have to for this. We have to beat the other news organizations. 50s, 60s, but certainly in the 70s that began, then it exploded in the 80s. And it's just been a spiral ever since. I get just as frustrated as most of you, if not all of you, what is called news as opposed to a talking head. That's a talking head. That's opinion, much like that first exercise that you gave us, Cheryl. That's opinion because of ratings. CNN came in the early 80s. Boy, it was so big they had to have 2 of them. CNN Headline News. That was a 30-minute newscast. Every half hour, you had a different newscast. Well, that went by the wayside so we could make room for more talking heads. Again, opinion took the place of news. And I think that has a lot to do with it, and it all goes to money, getting involved in the whole process. So as far as broadcast news, that's where I think we have come today. We don't know what news or what opinion is.
Okay. Jan, would you like to comment on that as well?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Cheryl. At this moment in the country, we actually have 2 countries. We have one based on a fact-based reality and the other that seems to be making up its own reality about a lot of things, not just politics, but climate, health, and a whole lot of other issues. I did some checking, and there was a Pew Research Center survey this summer that represents what I think is a real stark divide. 8 in 10 Democratic-leaning independents or Democrats, at 78%, trust the national media. And that is 43 points higher than Republican or Republican-leaning independents, who say, according to that survey of national media, only 35% say that they trust the media or have some trust in it. And that's half what it was in 2016. That same partisan divide does exist at the local level. Pew Research Center also included that in the survey, but then the divide was only 18 points different. 84% of Democrats versus 66% of Republicans who actually believe in the local media. I second what Dan said about what has happened to opinion masquerading as news. Right now, that very fact is building distrust in mainstream media. It's a strategic move. I mean, primarily on the right with entities like Fox News, but the left has participated as well. it's been adding its own left-leaning news functions like MSNBC as a way to refute the right. So it's building.
Okay, and Merle, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Cheryl. I think when you start looking at specifics on what incidents really come to mind, you have to go back to the 1980s when Janet Cook wrote the story about Jimmy's World and won a Pulitzer Prize for that story, and was found subsequently that the story was not true, that it was made up. And ironically, I think it was an editor at the Washington Post who said that instead of winning the Pulitzer, she should have been nominated for a Nobel Prize for literary work. And I think after that really was the first incident that comes to mind where a major news media came forward and apologized and tried to retract the story that had not only won a prize, but also was widely dispersed around the country. And then since then, I think there have been any number of stories. One was Jason Blair reporting on families of KIAs killed in Iraq, and that story was obviously made up, and Jason Blair made up many different stories, aspects of his story. I think then the next one that comes to mind was George Bush. I think there was a CBS News story about Bush's military service, and that was found to be false and completely made up without any truth to it, and CBS had to apologize. I think in 2014, there was a story in Rolling Stone about rape on campus that was widely dispersed and disseminated. That was also found to be false. So I think you have these different specifics, and I'm just mentioning a few of them, but I think all of these stories have had an impact on the overall trust in media that maybe one just by itself is not going to sway public opinion, but going back 20, 30 years to see these stories have been false or proven to be false, or where major media have been forced to retract the story. I think that has all played on where we are today.
All right, thank you. And would you go ahead and talk about looking forward? What can be done on the local level to rebuild trust in news reporting?
I think the main thing that can be done is to continue on reporting the news as fairly, accurately, objectively as we possibly can, and throw in there timely and complete as well. That if we cover those journalism basics, I think people will gradually get the idea of how we continue to cover that the news that they're getting locally, at least, is fair, is accurate, and it can be trusted. And I think the one other element of this is that we need to make sure that our opinions are separate from our news stories, that the news is in one part of a broadcast, or news is in another part of the paper, where opinion is kept separate. So there isn't confusion for the reader on what is opinion and what is fact.
Okay. And Jan, would you like to comment on that as well?
Sure. Merle and I are in agreement on some of those things. There's a difference between straight news reporting and opinion. We've been talking about that. If any opinion does show up in a news story, it should be clear that that's an opinion expressed by someone involved in the story, or the subject of the story, or people being impacted by the story, that it's not the reporter's view. And I could talk a little bit about that reporter's view later. Every news story has two sides, at least. That doesn't mean they're all equal, but We try not to report the news from one side, but to make sure that the subject of the story, the people involved it, or the opposition get a chance to comment. If it's not in that story, then it's a follow-up story. There's a note that says that those people haven't given their comments yet. And we are in complete agreement that the newsroom is completely separate from editorial opinions. Those of us who read us know that in our case, we do very few opinions. We think if we're doing our job in the newsrooms, then our readers can make up their own minds about the topic without our telling them what to think or telling them what we think.
Okay. And Dan?
Oh, what Merle said it. I mean, keep doing what we're doing. I think here on a local level that we do a good job with the facts, reporting as it happens. And I think it gets noticed. I've noticed in social media that all three of us get kudos, get mentioned, get, hey, good job on that. Meaning, here are the facts. There's no opinion in there. Just keep doing it every day, and that bangs over people's heads saying that we're going to.
I'm just sitting it there. I'm just saying, don't go use it to wipe anything.
I think we've got some other sounds going on here. If people
Oh
would
yeah,
be
someone's
careful
muted.
to,
Oh,
yeah, to mute. Yes.
just keep
I
doing
think-
what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. I think something that's related to this that I might like to have you all comment on is, I know that you have limited space in either, our print media or our, our live radio media. And how do you determine what facts, what information, what to include, what to exclude? How do you go about figuring out with the limited time and space that you have, what is most critical to relay to the public?
Well, I'll go in radio. My newscast is anywhere from, 350 to 750 words. And that may include anywhere from 5, 6, 7 stories, including weather and sports. So it's very short and to the point. This Facebook and website and everything, I've got to actually learn to spell words correctly and put everything on there. But it's not a long piece as compared to my 2 print media friends here. So what affects the most people? And how deeply does it affect on a daily basis with the daily newscast? If there's a major highway that's closed, that's probably going to be the lead because that affects the most people. And then work your way down. You have your middle stuff, your meetings, you have something fun, hopefully to have as a kicker. Then you have your sports and you say goodbye. But it's what affects the most people in my world.
Okay. All right, Jan, what about you?
Well, the first question we ask is, what information about this situation does the public have a right to know? How much of it should they know? And sometimes it's like Dan just said, if there's a major road closure, if there's a major crisis going on or a forest fire, for instance, then we need to get the news out. Unlike print and radio, we are not bound by space or time since we're digital. But we also look at questions to make sure that we're minimizing any harm with the story. If putting out the news would be harmful to a family or a child, then there's a question as to how much of that information should go out. And third, if we're covering something that might have a criminal aspect to it, say someone gets arrested for assault or for drug possession, it's ethical to follow up on what happened and how much of that does the public need to know. If the person's not a danger to the public, only to themselves, that could come into play.
Okay, and Merle?
I think you look at what's the most important thing happening in the community at any given time on a given day as probably what's going to be going in the paper or going online, going on the internet as the lead. But then there are just a number of stories that are going on that we cover routinely. And That might be the town of Poncha Springs, the hospital board, the school board, county commissioners, city. All of these stories are routinely covered by our staff. And as far as how do you determine what goes into the story, it's basically what that story is about. If you're going to cover a city council meeting or a town board meeting or commissioners meeting, what was said at that meeting, what action was taken. And that's what gets reported. As far as, I have to say that we have a staff of 3 reporters and a couple of other contributors as well, 3 or 4 contributors actually. And we don't draw a line on, okay, these are the number of stories that we're going to get in the paper. But if the story doesn't get in on one day, then the chances are we'll look at the next day and try to get that story in. There are no stories that get written that don't get into the paper, I have to say. So it's really a matter of what stories our staff can cover that go in, rather than what stories are we going to cover today versus what are not going to be in the paper. I mean, there would be events out there. For example, if there's an event, say the drone club organization is holding a meeting in Natron, we might choose not to cover that if we don't have the staff in place to cover something like that. But as far as the news goes, we will cover the news, and it will find its way into the paper. If not on Tuesday, then on Friday. If not on Friday, then on Tuesday.
Okay. I'm seeing on chat some people raising the issue of sources. Do you use multiple sources for your stories, and what are typically the sources that you get?
Want me to go first?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're already on here. You can
comment. If you're covering the meeting, then you're not going to go back. Well, I'll take that back. You could go back if there was something that a reporter found was not likely to be true, or that there was some discrepancy in facts and something, what a council member might have said, or what a county commissioner said, or a hospital board member, whatever. But generally, they're giving their opinion about a specific event or a specific topic subject. So you're not going to go back and question that. Where you would get, where you would do something like that is where you would question a story is if you're doing enterprise reporting and there is a conflict between what someone said versus what somebody else said, then you would try to go in and find out where the truth was, or at least you're going to report what subject A said versus what subject B said.
All right. And Jan, would you like to comment on that too?
Well, sure. When we cover a news story, we don't necessarily do laundry list stories of what happened in a meeting in consecutive order. We'll pick the first stories that go up are the most important things that happened in the meeting, obviously. Sometimes it's the comments from a commissioner or a trustee or a city council member or the treasurer of an organization. If it is related to a comment that has to do with a conflict or a debate that might have been going on, then we'll look at, the opposite viewpoint so that both sides of that issue get at least represented. Like I said earlier, there may not be equal in points, but they at least get a chance to have their voices heard. Sometimes we need sources outside that meeting. So the topic of the story isn't just the meeting, it's the entire topic itself. We'll interview several people related to that story to get the different viewpoints, because the point of the story might well be the conflict going on about the issue. And it's important to sort through those things. Sometimes while we're reporting on it, by the way, we end up with people with diametrically opposing views on the same thing. And it is usually good that the public knows that it isn't 100% agreement. Of course, we might get other stories where everybody's in full agreement, and that's a wonderful thing.
Okay, and Dan, would you like to address sources as well?
Oh, just real quick, sure. I mean, if your source is a known entity, someone of power, someone of responsibility, say Chaffee County Commissioner Keith Baker tells me County Road 120 is going to be closed tomorrow for chip sealing. I'm going to air with County Road 120 is going to be closed tomorrow for chip sealing. I'm not going to go to the road and bridge and get confirmation on that. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And the rule of thumb back in my college days, you got to get it from two people. The most recent example I can think of, Suzanne Morphew first went missing, and I get a call. There's a $200,000 reward being offered for information about the return of Suzanne Morphew. Excuse me, $200,000? And I put off, much to the chagrin of some other people I may have been around at the time. I didn't go to air immediately with it. I held on to it because, hold it, this doesn't sound right. I mean, because it's a large sum of money is the only reason. Who's putting this up? Who? So I held on to that for quite some time, talking about sources.
Okay. I'm also seeing on the chat some people asking about that in BV, the police blotter is published, and there's the name of everyone who gets a ticket or individuals who are arrested. And I know that a lot of local newspapers do this, but there's sort of a question about is this a shaming sort of thing, and why does that need to happen? And so I wanted to give the opportunity to people to address that sort of thing, which in some ways is also related to how you screen, or if you screen opinions or letters to the editor that are potentially harmful to an individual. So Merle, I'll let you start with that. And
I think that the police blotter is of interest to the community and what's going on in their neighborhood. If cars are being broken into or homes are being vandalized, we think that that should be something that the community wants to, needs to know, not wants to know, needs to know. So the newspaper has routinely covered police blotter and getting that information in, as well as we routinely cover the courts and not just the big cases, but all the cases that come before the courts are covered. So if somebody is named in the police blotter or someone is going to trial on a particular subject or a particular arrest, we're going to cover that. And we feel that it is important to the community. As far as letters to the editor goes, years ago, decades ago, we decided that opinions are really important. We see really four elements of the news: the hard news, the soft news, opinions, and then the fourth element is advertising. But what somebody thinks about a subject, a controversy, is news, because maybe that other person who reads that didn't realize that, oh, I never thought about something like that. So we place great importance on getting opinions in the paper, both ours as well as our readers that wish to make a comment about any particular subject, whether it's state or national or local.
okay. All right, Jan, do you want to comment on that as well?
Well, we do not publish the police blotter of who's gotten tickets and who's been arrested for assault or marijuana possession on it. First of all, we don't think unless a news organization follows up with what actually happened related to those charges, letting that sit there on a person's record, and we in the news media, our stuff stays out there for an awfully long time. Unless there's a follow-up story about the person being cleared or the charges dismissed, it doesn't seem ethical to us. The Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press and the Freedom of Information Coalition here in the state of Colorado, both of which are Colorado News Collaborative members with us, has been working on bills in committee that would actually help clean up people's records after a few years. of charges and things like that that do appear into news media. Regarding our code of ethics and letters to the editor and guest opinions, we try to hold people who submit things to us to the same standards we apply, to be honest and fair and balanced. We have been known to reject letters to the editor if they contain libelous comments and if they contain claims for which they have not provided any claim substantiation. We expect claim substantiation of ourselves. We hope that we receive it also from the people who submit things to us. That said, they're welcome to their opinions. They just shouldn't bash other people while they're doing it.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, so I would like to sort of direct this a little bit towards the national level and get a few comments from all of you on that before our time is up. So I'm wondering if you could comment on what you think needs to be done on the national level to rebuild trust in news reporting. Dan, do you want to start?
Trust in news reporting on the national level. I don't have a problem trusting a lot of what I see on the national level. I think it's more of a problem that we're going to have to start trusting one another. I don't see, when I watch ABC, I'm an ABC guy. When I watch ABC Evening News, it's 30 minutes as opposed to an all news station. They're doing what I do, meaning I'm a music radio station that provides information, news. So it's condensed, boom, 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 boom. I don't have a whole lot of problem. They use a lot of loaded words that you pointed out earlier that I wish they wouldn't, but they were trying to paint a picture. Again, they want you to feel like they want you to smell the smells and hear the sounds and everything involved. And I think that's why they use a lot of those words. But the question is, I guess, how do we start trusting one another? That's first, before you even can start talking about trusting the news.
And Jan?
Well, I would agree with Dan on that, the last comment about trusting each other. That issue, I think, is bigger than the news media, but we can occasionally contribute to it by not just sticking to the facts, but even unwittingly inserting personal opinions into our reporting. Let me give you one example by a national news reporter who was in Kabul during the recent evacuation of Americans and those who helped us from Afghanistan. Speaking of the situation of the airport, that on-air reporter said, the American military is struggling, speeding up the evacuation process. Now that reporter could simply have said, it appears the American military is speeding up the evacuation process. That was fact. Adding the word struggling, in other words, adding adverbs and adjectives to what is factual about something, unless it's backed up by a quote that someone they interview on air that says, what do you think about the situation? And the person says, they're struggling. Okay, well, that's somebody else's opinion, not the reporter's opinion. The reporter inserted their opinion into that, and that has no place in reporting at any level.
And Merle, would you like to comment about the national level?
I think there's going to be a sifting and winnowing of news sources, because I think people are figuring out what they can trust, news sources they can trust and what they cannot. So I think that happens naturally. I think as far as how can the national news media regain trust, I'd say it needs to go back to covering the facts. I mean, just because something is true or the truth doesn't necessarily mean that that story is being fairly and accurately reported. You can report a portion of the news without it being complete, or it can be just an element of a story. So the story, the national media really needs to get back to being not just fair, but accurate, objective, as well as timely and complete. If you meet all of those elements of a story, then that is good journalism. And I think that are we going to see opinionated news heads talking for years down the road? Yes, for sure. But I think that the American public is going to sift through the sources that they see and come to the sources that they can trust.
And someone on chat has just raised this whole thing that I think we're all dealing with, that are really deliberate misinformation campaigns that we're seeing the media be used for. I'm just interested in your comments on, you know, how we handle that as a country, and have any chance of moving forward and maintaining our democracy.
Well, a lot of that disinformation is happening at the social media level and not just at the national level. I think some of the literacy tips that you started this with, Cheryl, is one of the steps that can be taken. I mean, people are unwittingly becoming part of not just misinformation, but disinformation campaigns by passing on junk. And at the local level, I mean, you got what's happening in BV and you got what's really happening in BV. And you get a ton of disinformation that happens there. I don't know how much of it is on purpose or not, but that's a local kind of example where something that was started for good, you know, has layers to it. You know, at the very end of last year, one of the last pieces we did from the year was to share with members of the public the fact-checking sources that we use, not constantly, but there's a whole list of them that my reporters use. So letting people know where to check the facts. I mean, go to Reuters, you know, fact checking if you want just a quick source, you know, and put the question is it true or not? So doing things like that makes people smart consumers of the news.
Merle, would you like to comment on that?
One of the issues that we have with the society today is that of social media, and that somebody can be putting something forward locally, nationally, however they might choose, that's not true. And the issue there, I think, is the people who don't take the source into consideration. And I think that that's where the League's efforts on literacy and determining where to look for news and news that you can trust is so important. So I think the part that we need to be looking at going forward basically is who can you trust in your news? What news can you trust? What news sources can you trust? And I think one other element of that is that people have to see that that has value in their life, not just something that they can switch to on and off, but that information is important to them and it's important to their community.
Just real quick, what are some of the sources that the three of you think are very reliable?
You know, from my perspective, you check the different news sources that are out there, whether it's the Post, any of the national news networks, but you take things with a grain of salt. And I don't normally go to the Christian Science Monitor and some of those sources, but I think that you have to look at all the sources that are out there and take the information with a grain of salt, or at least question what might be the truth or what might be a fact. Where is a reporter covering all aspects? Is this good journalism, fair, accurate, objective, etc.?
Okay. And Dan, what about sources for you? You've kind of are sources that you would recommend to people as reliable sources.
Well, certainly the entities involved, whether it be a politician, someone that holds office, an organization, if they put out a news release, I mean, in our small world, right, we rely heavily on news releases. Hey, organization, you communicate with me what you're doing, and I will pass that on to everyone else. And like ABC, NBC, CBS, the Denver Post, I mean, the names you know, not that they never make mistakes. Merle did a very good job earlier talking about they've been taking advantage of, but the difference is they stepped up and said so. Hey, my bad. Whereas we've seen other people not step up and take responsibility. The only thing I'll say in closing is be an informed consumer, whether you're buying shampoo or whether you're taking in news. You have to educate yourself. You can't be gullible. Well, they said it makes my hair the brightest of all the shampoos. I got to go with it. Inform yourself, again, whether it be shampoo or news.
Okay, and Jan?
Well, obviously, I trust my reporters. They do a great job of getting into the information and double checking their facts and making sure they're talking to people. And lots of times they're going way past the news releases that are put out. I read a lot of news, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Guardian. I cover a lot of ground at the national and state level. We're part of the Colorado News Collaborative, so I trust my Colorado News Collaborative partners, Colorado Public Radio, National Public Radio, the major news stations, public television, Colorado Sun, Denver Post, the Vail and Summit dailies, lots of topic-specific news sources like Chalkbeak and Freshwater News, because those have to do with specific issues related to things that we're covering. If I pay attention to things going on CNN, I'll double check to see what Fox News is saying about it, and then I'll check on MSNBC, and usually the three of them vary. So you kind of blend what's in there. You go to all of them, partly because I found them reliable from an information standpoint, fact-based, fairly balanced, or at least they balance each other out.
Okay, well, certainly a big thank you to all of our panelists. Appreciate your time and your comments. And I'm going to turn this back over to Karen at this point.
I want to ditto that from Cheryl. Thank you all for your time, to our panelists and Cheryl for organizing this, and all of you who took the time to listen and give your opinions. It's not an easy issue. So thank you very much. Any of you who would like to turn on your video and your audio and stay with the league, since we haven't seen each other for a while, feel free to do so. But our panelists, you can go, and I'm going to stop the recording, but you can stay on.
Okay, and I would also like to thank Karen for doing the technical part of this. It was quite a bit to work out, and she really put a lot of effort into it, and I really appreciated her help with this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank